Can everyone see that? Yes, fabulous. Thank you very much, guys. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the quantitative reasoning section of the Ucat today. My name is Ella. I am one of the 6 med tutors. I'm just finished my 4th year of medical school at the University of Manchester. So it was a little while ago since I actually sat my Ucat, but I've been teaching it ever since I started medical school. So a little bit about 6 Med, so created by medical students and young doctors for, aspiring medical students. And we've taught many students over the past 6 years that 6 Med's been about. And we run these webinars that you are on now, which last usually about an hour, as well as Ucat and BMAT support courses, which are full-day courses, so a little bit more intense. And also personal statement support and interview preparation, mock interviews, things like that. And this is just some of the bundles that are currently available. And if you want to use this code, if you're looking at any of the bundles, you can save some money. So yeah, a little bit about me. I'm a medical student, just finished my 4th year, so I'm about to go into my final year. And I'm based at the University of Manchester. So what we're going to be doing today is talking a little bit about quantitative reasoning. Hopefully you all know what the Ucat is and have started to think about revision and actually looked into how it's set up and things, because we won't really be talking about that today. We'll be mainly just focusing on this section of the Ucat, sorry. I'll go into some top tips, then we'll do some practice questions all together, and then hopefully you'll feel a little bit better about this topic. Usually people are already quite confident about this topic, so hopefully things will run nice and smoothly. And then at the end, there's an option for Q&A. I will answer all your questions at the end, if that's okay, guys, because I will lose track otherwise and not be able to keep up as we go. But I will, if you do have a question that comes up, pop it in the Q&A box. And I'll go through them all at the end and answer them. And that can be questions on this section of the Ucat more generally, or anything about medical school or medical school admissions. I really don't mind answering any questions on that. Yeah, so just some housekeeping. Just pop your answers in the Q&A box when we get to them, and that should be fine. And yeah, I'll answer all your questions at the end, so don't worry if I'm not answering your questions as we go along. I have seen them. We will just come back to them if that's okay. So just to start with, you don't necessarily need to put this in the Q&A box if you don't want to. If you do, that's fine as well. But just have a think about, on a scale of 1 to 4, how confident are you feeling at this moment about the quantitative reasoning section of the Ucat? Okay, fab. Brilliant. So there's quite a variety then between you. Some people are more confident than others, but absolutely fine. I would have been very not confident in this section, to be honest. Maths was never my strong point. So the aims of today, we're going to try and understand the types of QR questions that might come up, and then we're going to practice some as a group, and we'll do that timed just so you can get a feel for what it is like on the actual day. So what is quantitative reasoning? Well, it's the maths section of the Ucat, if you want to call it that, and it involves solving what are quite basic calculations, usually about GCSE level calculations, addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, working probability out, that sort of level. And you get 36 questions, and you do them in 24 minutes, so you get about 45 seconds per question, but that includes looking at any graphs or information that they've given you. Just to start off with, these are some formulas you should just have at the back of your mind. Most of you will already be completely aware of these, and so you should be okay with them. But speed equals distance over time, it comes up quite a lot in Ucat. Usually, if they're asking you to switch between units, they will give you the conversion. They're not trying to test you on whether you know the metric versus imperial system. They're trying to actually test the maths that you are using behind that. And but it's just worth remembering that 1 mile is 1.6 kilometers. It's just quicker for you than if you go into the question that's asking that, and you already know. Probability and means multiply the numbers, or means add the numbers together, okay, in probability questions. And then percentage change is this formula here at the bottom. So hopefully that makes sense. They're just hopefully that's just giving you a little bit of idea on the sort of level that they're going to pitch these questions at. Most of you will have heard of these, I would have guessed. So when you're approaching your quantitative reasoning part of your Ucat, when you're actually answering your questions, some sort of top tips for you: use the whiteboard you're given. So you're given next to your computer, so most of you all know Ucat's a computer exam. Next to your computer, you should be given a small whiteboard or piece of paper and a pen. And it's really good to use your whiteboard in the exam, because some of you might find it a little bit more tricky to do all the maths in just your head, especially if it's sort of a longer question, which involves, multiple steps, for example. So definitely use your whiteboard unless you're some sort of mental maths wizard. Practice your mental maths before going in, at very least for checking your answers. So when it comes to actually doing the questions, quantitative reasoning isn't particularly, they aren't difficult questions necessarily, but within the time period that you're given is quite high stress. So if you're trying to check your answer, it's good to have a bit of mental maths, so that if they're asking you to add 20 different numbers together, you can at least gauge roughly where your answer will be in terms of sort of ballpark figure, just to double check instead of actually having to retype in your calculator all of those numbers again. So use the calculator as well. So you're given a calculator and it's on the screen of your computer, and you have to use your mouse keypad to operate it. The Ucat's website, they have free mock exams as well as free question banks on there. I really recommend when you're coming up to your Ucat that you use these question banks. They're quite small, so you might need to use other resources first to just nail your technique down. But when you're coming up to your exam, in the couple of weeks before your exam, go onto the Ucat website and use those mock tests. They time it as it will in the real exam, and it's set up exactly the same as the real exam. And then you can get a feel for how the calculator is used, because honestly, if you've got your calculator in your hand, that'll be so much quicker than the actual Ucat's calculator. So make sure that you have practiced with that calculator before you go in. So we're going to go through some questions, and I will give you 45 seconds per question, but how I'll do it is I will time as we go, and I will let you know when 45 seconds is up, and then I will give you an extra 15 seconds for those of you who haven't finished the question, just to give you a little bit of extra time, because for some of you, you might not have started prepping yet. So it's about, the technique of the question as well as the speed. So therefore, it's up to you whether or not you're doing it within the actual time you'll be given in the Ucat. So if that's okay with all of you guys, take the 45 seconds and then pop your answer in the chat box if you want to, and we will have a little discussion. Please let me know if there's any of these questions that you don't understand where the answers come from, and we can just briefly talk through them. So hopefully that all makes sense. So this is your first question. So let me just get my timer up. Okay. So, right, I will start now and I'll let you know when 45 seconds is up. 45 seconds is up, but I'll give you another 15 seconds. Okay, stop, everyone. And if people pop their answers in the chat. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, guys. And thanks everyone who's commented in the Q&A box with their answer. So the answer to this question is E, and hopefully most of you understand why. I think I didn't see anyone say any answer that wasn't E, so that's brilliant. And how you do this question, so the question asks, how much DVD and Blu-ray stock was sold in the whole year? So when you're given a graph like this, make sure you read the axis, because they can quite easily give you, you'll see the months listed along the bottom, they could quite easily duplicate a month, so go into the next year of sales, for example. So just make sure you're specifically reading those axes so that you don't make a mistake there. But in terms of the answer to this question, you basically have to add all of those figures on the graph together to find out how many DVD and Blu-ray units were sold. And then the figure that's given is over 8,500. And so therefore E is the closest figure to the answer. So hopefully that one is pretty self-explanatory. So in terms of how would you do this one quick, really you have to add everything together, although you can see that for each figure it's quite a large number. So for majority they're sort of around 500, so you can round up and down and do some quick mental math. So if a figure is 511, for example, you could potentially round that down to 500, and if there's any that are close to rounding up, you can do the same. And these sorts of questions where they're asking for the closest figure, you can use rounding to figure it out, because you'll still get more than 8,500, so you'll still know that one's the figure. You can see that the options, they're not very close together. You can pretty much immediately strike out that A is going to be the wrong answer, because 2,500 is not a very big number, bearing in mind how many of these are over 500, how many of the actual individual sales are over 500. So you can strike down some options and narrow it down if you're running out of time and make an educated guess, or you can use rounding, or you can get nice and speedy on a calculator and type them all in. Okay, here using the same figure is another question. So I'll give you 45 seconds on the clock for this one. Okay, sorry, 45 seconds are up. Okay, a minute's up. So what do we think the answer is for this one? So we've got some people saying A. Thank you, everybody. The answer is A for this one. Seeing someone on the chat say for that previous question, can you figure out sort of the amount from 1 and just times it by 12 to sort of figure out the answer? And the reason they give you these kind of graphs where there's quite a big variety of numbers between each section is to sort of stop you from sort of oversimplifying it and making it sort of too easy for yourself. So that's why. So in this question, you're asked in the final quarter of the year how many more DVD units were sold compared with Blu-ray units. So looking at the last quarter of the year, so the last 3 months, and you're trying to figure out the difference between the DVD and Blu-ray units. So not the total, but the difference between the two. So you have to add all the DVD units together and all the Blu-ray units and find the difference between them. And you can see this one's a little bit trickier to round with because the answers are closer together. But when the answer is, you know, one of the extremes, it makes it a little bit easier. So hopefully that one wasn't too difficult either. So someone said, is it from October to December? It should be the final 3 months. So yes, 1, 2, 3. So this is the third question. So we'll go through this one next. And I'll give you another 45 seconds on the clock starting now. Okay, 45 seconds is up. Give you another 15 seconds. Okay, stop. What do we think about that one? What do we think the answer might be? B. Okay, everyone's saying B, which is the correct answer. So when we're thinking about calculating percentage increase, so this question asks us just to look at the December figures. So for December, the DVD sales were 628 and the Blu-ray sales were 413. And the question's asking what's the percentage increase of DVD when you compare it to Blu-ray. And someone has popped in the chat how to figure it out, I think I saw. So you figure out what the difference is percentage change. So you figure out what the difference is, you divide that increase by the DVD sales. 1 second. I haven't got the working out with me. Sorry, someone else made this PowerPoint. So the difference between 6 to 8 and 4, 13 is 215. And then, sorry, I'm getting my calculator. I'm just making sure I'm telling you the same thing. Okay, so 215 is the difference between the two numbers. Sorry, I was just checking my working out. And then what we do is we divide that 215 by what the original sale is. So it's saying compare it to the Blu-ray. So we use the Blu-ray figure and we do 215 divided by 413, and then we times it by 100, and that gives you 52. So that's the answer, 52%. So with percentage increase, it's the difference between the numbers divided by the original number or what you're comparing to, and then times it by 100. I hope that makes sense. And someone said, how can you work this out quickly? It's about practicing these questions and getting really slick with that. And as long as you can see straight away what the question's asking, you can go in and quickly add it. It's also worth, I will just put your minds at rest a little bit. There are some just simple addition in the Ucat. So they will have questions where it is just, we'll say, you know, add 2 or 3 numbers together. So some questions you can do a little bit quicker and some might take a little bit more time. So don't worry too much if you're struggling to get these done on time. So question 4, give this one a go. And I will pop my timer back on for you guys. Okay, starting now. Okay, 45 seconds is up. Okay, stop. Everyone stop and pop your answers in the chat. What do you think for this one? Not sure how to do it. Lost, maybe C. Okay, we can go through this one, guys. Don't worry. So the answer is C. So well done for those of you who got it. So let's look at this question. In January and in February, so we're only looking at January and February, they sold a third product, and this product was USB. It's not really relevant, but we can just, you know, call that product whatever you want. And over these 2 months, they sold 77 units of USBs, and it's asking what fraction, approximately, of total sales of the 3 products were USBs for these 2 months. So how we do this one is we need to know a couple of things. First, we need to know what the total sales of the 3 products were. So how we do that is we add all the DVD sales together and the Blu-ray sales together, and then we add this 77 units. And I think it should be around 1,400, I believe, somewhere around that. Is that right? No, but less than that, maybe. And so we add all of those together and we come up with, I'll do it on my calculator as we go. So total sales was $1,400. And then we're thinking about what fraction of the total sales was the USB. So that's 77 over 1,400. And then we simplify the fraction down. And it says approximate fraction, so don't worry if it was a bit of a strange one, but you're just trying to simplify it down until you can see which fraction comes out the closest. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Yes, so 77 over 1,400 exactly, and then you simplify it down to figure out which fraction it links to. So someone said it doesn't simplify down. It's about not exactly simplifying it down. Ucat questions are all about rounding and using your logic to figure out which one it's most likely to be. And if you simplify it down, it should, the fraction that is C, 236 is the most similar. That's what the idea is. So yeah, you can also work out the decimals. That's absolutely fine. If you work better with decimals and are able to switch between decimal and fraction, that should be fine as well. So guys, don't get too caught up on the fact that it doesn't directly simplify down. It's asking you approximately which fraction it is. So make sure you're reading the question properly, and it should be that that's the most similar. And yes, you are allowed calculators in the exam, but you have to use Ucat's own calculator. As long as you've got, the actual technique of you were able to come up with the larger fraction, honestly, you should be okay. There won't be many of these questions that simplify down. These questions are meant to be the harder questions so that you get a feel for what, the hardest questions are going to be like. There will be some easier questions as well. So this is a different set of data now. I'm going to do some questions based on this set of data. So I'll give you 45 seconds on the clock for this question. Okay, put 45 seconds on the clock now. .45 seconds gone, sorry. Okay, and that's time. Put your answers in the chat for this one. Hopefully this one was a little easier. This one's quite self-explanatory. D, well done. I saw a lot of D in the chat, so well done everyone who did that one. For anyone who didn't understand this one, so the question is asking how much does James weigh, so we just look straight at the data given for James, not interested in anyone else's, and it says that he's 9 stone 7 pounds, and they want you to convert that into just pounds. So we convert the 9 stones into pounds by doing 9 times 14. They've given us a little key on the side that tells us that 14 pounds are in a stone. And so that gives us £126, but then we need to make sure that we add on the extra £7 as well. And that's where they will try and trick you out, is they might give you an answer that works out to be, 9 stones exactly. So just make sure you go back and double check that you've added everything you need to. But hopefully that one was a little easier. Okay, so next question, I'll put 45 seconds on the clock for this one. .45 seconds are up. Okay, and stop. What do we think our answers are? Okay, some C's and some B's, I think, are in the chat. So the answer is B. So just, I see why people have said C, because those answers are very close together. So it'll just be to do with your specific maths. So just be careful. How is this question done? Well, so we look at Tom's weight. He weighs 84 kilos, and we need to change that into stones and pounds. So how we're going to do that is we're first going to change it into pounds, and we do that by timesing by 2.2, because it was 2.2 pounds per kilo. And that answer should be about 185-ish. And then you need to figure out how many stones are within that, and you do that by dividing by 14 and seeing how many are left over, because there's 14 pounds in a stone. So I think anyone who said C, don't worry too much. It'll just be that you it'll just be that it would have been the maths. And just be very careful, because I'm just looking now at the chat, and some of people have said, well, I got 13.2. These aren't grams and kilograms. Okay, so 0.2 of a stone, for example, isn't going to be 2 pounds, which I think is where people have gone wrong. You don't want to use decimals in this, because you're going to get confused, because there aren't 100 pounds in a stone. So you can't use decimals. Or if you do use decimals, you need to convert the decimal into the pounds, because there's 14 pounds in a stone. There's not 100. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but I would recommend when you're doing your division, do it by hand and don't use a calculator for this one. And when you're in primary school, you should have been taught how to do long division with the remainders instead of decimal points. Use something like that, because that'll make a lot more sense with this, because you're trying to look for the leftover pounds. Decimals won't relate directly to the number of pounds. I hope that makes sense. Okay, right. What I'm trying to say is, I know that you guys got 13.2 as your answer, and you did your technique correctly, and that is technically the answer, but 0.2 of a stone isn't 2 pounds, because there aren't, it's not like grams and kilograms. Okay, there's 14 pounds in a stone. So therefore it works out at about 3, because 0.2 of a stone isn't £2. Okay. Yeah, so it rounds to about £3. And people who are saying, how do you figure out 0.2 of a stone? You don't necessarily need to. This is what I'm saying about use your remainders. Try and go back to your primary school maths, where when you did long division, you'd get your full number and then you'd look at how much is left over. You don't necessarily keep going and figure out the decimal point afterwards. I'm really hoping that makes sense. Yes, so you've converted his weight from kilos to pounds, which is, I think, 184.8. I think that's correct. And then we need to figure out how many stones are within that. And there are 13 stones in 184.8 pounds. And then there's some left over. And we're trying to figure out how many are left over. But if you have a decimal point, then 0.2 of a stone doesn't mean £2 because there's 14 pounds in a stone. So you're then trying to figure out what 0.2 of 14 is, or you can just figure out how many are left over after you've taken the 13 stone out. I hope that started to make a little bit more sense. I've seen some people are now starting to understand it. Yes, if someone said you can just take the 184.8 and take away the 182 that you've used to change to stone, and then you're left with about 2.8. That's what someone has just said. And that's roughly 3. So that's how you do it. So don't get bogged down on using a calculator. Don't get bogged down on the decimal points. Just think it through. And just think we're looking at how many are left over. We're not looking at specific decimal points. So hopefully that will make sense now. But just be careful because it's that kind of thing that will trip you up. It's not necessarily that this maths is hard and you guys have got all the technique correct, but then it's just when you look at it, maybe you've just been tripped up by what is quite a little minor detail. Okay, try this one next. I'll give you 45 seconds. "45 seconds are up." Time is up. Pop your answers in the chat. See, okay. I saw most people have got this one right. I think this one doesn't trick you up as much as that previous one did, but again, it's just about being quick with this one because the actual maths might take quite a while. So looking at total weight of a boy in kilos, so we need to change John and James's weights into kilos, and we do this by figuring out how many pounds in total each of them weigh, and then we can convert that to kilos by dividing by 2.2 and then just adding all those weights together. So hopefully that one makes sense to you guys. So we can move on. Here's another one. So give this one a go. I'll put 45 seconds on the clock. "45 seconds are up." Okay, time's up. Pop your answers in the chat. Some people saying B. Brilliant. This is the answer. That's correct. Well done, guys. So let's talk. I've seen some people said they weren't sure how to do this one. We'll talk through it quickly. So in our previous question, we figured out the total weight of the boys in kilos, and we figured out that it was 384 kilos, okay? And so in this question, so usually you get them in sets like this in the Ucat, so you'll have already figured that out. And so we need to figure out what the average is. And so to do that, we divide that total number by 5, and we figure out what the average weight is, okay? And then after that, we're trying to figure out as a percentage how much heavier Chris is compared to the average of the boys. So you figure out the difference to start off with. So 384 divided by 5 is, so the average of the boys is 76.8 kilos and Chris is 100 kilos. So the difference is 23.2. And then, so we know what the difference is, and I'm sure most of you were able to get to that point. And then we're just trying to demonstrate it as a percentage. So we're doing the difference divided by the original, like we talked about earlier, times by 100. So the change divided by the original times by 100, which is, which works out to be about 30%. I'm not sure if I don't think it's specifically 30% exactly, but it's the closest to 30%. So hopefully that makes sense. It's following that. So we analyze. So no, just be careful, read the question carefully. So it says the average of the 5 boys. There are only 5 boys there, so you must include Chris's in the average as well. So just make sure we're reading the question carefully, and it will work out to be 30%, roughly 30%. So people are still asking questions about this one. So the difference is 23.2, I think we said, and then we divide it by the original. So that's the average of all the boys. So 76.8, and then you times that answer by 100, and it's 30.2 or something like that. And that'll give you your answer. So it's always, the original is always the thing that you're comparing it to. So earlier it was, we're comparing it to the Blu-ray discs or whatever it was. This one, we're comparing his weight to the average. And it's always what we're comparing to that goes on the bottom of that fraction. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, so the original is the average of the boys. But make sure you're including Chris within that. Okay, just read the question. If it said compared to the average of the other boys, then you would leave him out, but it says the average of the 5 boys, so you need to make sure you include him. Hopefully that makes sense. There are obviously other methods you can use, but these are just, you know, the basic recommended methods that can guarantee every time that all work, especially if you're not a particular maths whiz. Okay, here's another one. So I'll give you 45 seconds to do this one. "45 seconds is up, sorry guys. Again, time, everyone pop your answers in the chat. Yeah, there's just conversion of this one. So it's thinking C. Yeah, brilliant. So again, it is just conversion. So just be careful with the way that they've set it out, where they've said the $1 first. But yeah, 0.69 pounds to $1. And it is just quite a simple conversion. So hopefully you understand that one. Okay, try this one next. Give you 45 seconds on the clock for this one. Okay, 45 seconds is gone. Again, a minute's gone. So what do we think our answer is? What people think C. That's completely correct. So this is a relatively easy probability question. So we're looking at the probability of pulling out a red sweet. So we know there's 30 red sweets, and overall there's 100 sweets in the bag. So there's 30 in 100 chance that the sweet will be red, and we can simplify that down to 3 in 10. So hopefully that one made sense to everyone. And you can draw diagrams if that's easier for you. It depends what you're quicker at, really. So that's all the practice questions we've got today. And hopefully, you know, most of you got the right answer and most of you did it within the time. So that's brilliant. So hopefully that's okay. If a question asks for approximate values, please don't be scared of rounding up and down, and don't beat yourself up for not getting exactly the right answer. You don't have time for that. This isn't a GCSE exam. This is trying to use your logic to get the closest answer. And sometimes you're running out of time and you need to use logic to rule out some answers and then make an educated guess based on that. And please don't be scared to do that. Use the calculator, but don't over rely on it. If it's something you can do in your head, try to do it in your head because it's so much quicker. But use your calculator if you do need it, and be as confident as you can. Don't beat yourself up over answers. Don't, let one difficult question mean that you're going to struggle for the rest of it. Just be confident and move on. And like I said before, some questions are a lot easier than others, and this will balance out. So hopefully that makes sense. And I promise you, I didn't even do maths A-level. I got 890 on my Ucat in this subsection. So you don't necessarily need to be brilliant at maths. You just need to be confident and practice your technique and practice reading those questions, because it is not reading that question and not specifically taking that into account that will be a downfall if you if you let it. So we don't necessarily need to redo this, but have a think about how confident you now feel about this section. And hopefully if you were able to do those questions, you should be definitely feeling confident, because that means you've at least got the technique down. And with more practice, you become quicker, I absolutely promise. And what I recommend doing now is going home and having a look at some question banks and try and do them in a timed manner and see if you can improve your technique at all. And then nearer the time of your exam, go onto Ucat's website and practice your exams. Okay, so that's everything. I will answer some questions now if anyone has any. If you put a question in the Q&A earlier on, there were quite a lot of comments now in the Q&A, so you might just have to repeat your question if I've missed it. So I'm just trying to go back through them. Okay, I'm just trying to see. Okay, I'm going to start here with the questions. If you asked a question before any of these ones, just re-pop it in the chat for me to make it a little easier for me to see. So how do we round with 3 digits? Because I always get the wrong answer. Yeah, in terms of rounding with 3 digits in the Ucat, it's estimation. I tend to, let's say it's, 0.705 or something, then I automatically would look at that and round it to 0.7 in terms of the Ucat, because precision isn't really necessary in these questions. It's about trying to find which is the closest answer and then going with that. So use estimation in terms of with the Ucat, and they will generally try to make it clear, hopefully. But they won't usually ask questions where the answer is 3 sort of decimal points, for example. How many questions do we need to practice per day? When I did it, this is how I always recommend people practice for any of the Ucat sections. Just do 15 minutes a day, but do it almost every day. And as many questions, it's going to vary between which section you do, because obviously abstract reasoning, they're quicker questions, but just do about 15 minutes a day. That should be absolutely done. It should be absolutely fine. And for anyone asking, is it done? Yeah, you feel free to leave if you want to. And hopefully it was useful for you guys, and good luck. What's the max you can get? You can get 900 in every section apart from SJT, the situational judgment, the ethicsy bit, which is marked differently and separately to the rest of the Ucat. That one's marked in bands. So each section is marked out of 900, and then you get a total. How did I revise to get 890? I just did a little bit and often and practiced with speed. I'm very quick and I'm quite confident with my sort of using logic. I potentially, because I'm not so good at maths, was like a benefit for me, maybe, because I wasn't over complicating and over, thinking all my answers. I was, trying to use logic to get the answers. So I was very quick. That's probably how I did so well. So practice, and then you'll be okay. Tips for speed. So definitely practice, because then your maths will get stronger and you'll be quicker. If you can use mental maths, use it. Don't bother typing on the calculator, because it is quite difficult to type quickly on the calculator. And don't be scared of estimating, and then that's usually pretty helpful. And if there's a question that's quite obviously easy, don't overcomplicate it and double check it and things. Just, just try and go for it. So I feel like it's about luck as well. Sometimes you get most easy questions. So arguably, yes, it is. It really depends on the length of the question. They're all pretty much the same difficulty level, I would say, but just some require a little extra work than others. What did I get in total? I'll have to figure out. I can only remember my average. In total, I got just under 3,000 for my Ucat. I think that's what you mean. And I got band 2 in my SJT. How many hours did I revise for? Like I said, 15 minutes. And I did that for the whole summer before I took my Ucat. I took my Ucat quite late in the summer. How do you know when to skip harder questions? Because I've heard sometimes easier questions at the end. So I think it's randomized, because the way Ucat works, it's the same as medical school exams, where they have a big question bank and each exam pulls random questions from the question bank. So in theory, you could have an identical exam with someone else, but also, it's not very likely because they've got this massive question bank. And so it's randomized. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to increase in difficulty like a GCSE does, but also it doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of your section, they will be easier questions. If you're spending a long time on a question, or sometimes people know their weaknesses and they just go, I absolutely can't remember this formula, I can't remember how to do it, then try and make an educated guess and move on. That's what I'd say. But don't ever just, guess and move on, and don't leave a question back blank. Just think, oh, well, this answer's preposterous, so it's not that. And every answer you figure out is an impossible answer, then really you're increasing your chance of getting it, the right answer. Is 6 Med the same as BMAT Ninja? BMAT Ninja is one of the products that 6 Med offer. How do you increase speed at doing questions because I run out of time? Practice mental maths and confidence. And I sometimes tell people, when you first start revising, don't bother with timing yourself, because you need to get the technique down first and then speed up. Whereas sometimes if you're timing yourself straight off the bat, then you're like, oh, well, I didn't do that question correct because I ran out of time. Make sure that your technique's perfect first before timing yourself and making yourself move quickly. I'd say that. And again, like I said, some questions are really quick and easy and you'll do them in 10 seconds. Others might require a minute, and that's okay because they'll balance themselves out a little bit. Yeah, so can you go back to different types of questions page? So I could take a screenshot. If you email the 6 Med team, you can get a copy of the PowerPoint for yourself, or recording of the explanations as well if you want them. Do you have a strategy technique when approaching questions, how to read big and many tables? Read the question first, because as you'll have seen today, not all questions required you to read the whole table, but just make sure you've read the question correctly and then go back and pull out the actual information that you're being asked to discuss. And don't be scared by a big graph because you might not need the whole thing. So yeah, I would say that. And learn how to skim read as well, because it's, especially for the other sections, very useful. How many weeks prior to the exam would you suggest that we do the mocks on the Ucat website? So back when I took my Ucat, these mocks that were on the Ucat website, there wasn't that many of them because it was quite a new thing. I don't know how many there are now. There probably is a few more, but there's not loads. So maybe, 2 or 3 weeks before your exam, just to start getting a feel for it, and don't be scared to redo the exam twice, the mock exam. Do you use memory function in the calculator much during the exam? No, because you're not allowed to take your own calculator in. It's a screen calculator, and it's like any calculator you just get off Google, where it's very simple and there's literally no functions. It just adds and subtracts and times and divides. So no. What's harder in my opinion, BMAT or Ucat? Ucat's more time pressured, and that's what people find difficult, especially people who are going into medicine, because everyone going into medicine is really clever, and clever people want to sit and think about things, I think, whereas they don't necessarily trust their instincts. So Ucat generally, I think, is, although I never sat BMAT originally, although I have taught BMAT and sat a BMAT exam separately just to, see what it's like, so that I can teach it better. But I do remember a lot of people were more stressed about BMAT because you don't get your results until after you've applied to the university. So there's more pressure with BMAT. But UCAT's more time pressured. So they kind of balance each other out. They're both pretty similar, I think. So what did I get in total for UCAT? I already said that. I've been trying to improve my speed by doing Ucat sections separately under timed conditions, but I don't seem speed up. Do you have any suggestions on what to do? Keep going and don't beat yourself up. And like I said, if you've got your technique down first, then it's much easier to improve your speed after that. Whereas you're not going to improve your speed if you're sort of struggling with the actual content of the questions. But again, learn how to trust your instinct and make intelligent judgments. That's part of the reason why places choose UCAT, because it's a skill you're going to need to have one day when you're looking after patients and you're having to make quick decisions. So just trust your instincts and keep going, and don't beat yourself up, because it is hard and you will start seeing improvements. And also on the day you've got your adrenaline rushing through you, and so you'll be more on the ball, hopefully. Which section did you find hardest when you were preparing for UCAT? I think everyone finds abstract reasoning the hardest, because it's so hard to prepare for and it's really time pressured. So that, I think, is the hardest, but that's the one that you're going to benefit most from, just literally looking at practice questions. With abstract reasoning, don't bother reading anything about actual techniques, because when you actually get in the exam, you don't have any time to apply those techniques. So that's probably the hardest, but you just have to keep practicing. Also, did you find the QR section in the actual exam similar or harder than Medify mocks? I never use Medify, although generally QR section in the actual exam is easier than any mocks you find, with the exception of UCAT's own ones. But I would say QR, I didn't find that difficult actually in the exam compared to the other sections, which is probably why I did quite well in it. If you finish a section early, can you bank your time for the next section? No, you can't. I don't know if any of you have ever sat a driving theory test. It's a similar thing where you have a time and then it finishes, and then it says, now we are moving on to the next section. But if you finish early, which people rarely do, then you can go back and check your answers. But usually people don't. I'm not sure I finished early on any of my sections. I actually think on quantitative reasoning, I didn't actually finish all the questions. I think I was 1 or 2 questions off finishing it. What did I get for all the other sections? I don't remember my exact scores, because like I said, it's been 5 years, I think, since I sat mine. But I know that I didn't do very well in verbal reasoning. So that was probably a lower score. I think that was 690 or something. And then the rest were all in the sort of low 700s from what I remember. And then quantitative reasoning was 890, which is why my total / mean grade was quite high. Did I only use resources Ucat provided? No, I had a book. I had a book that was called like 10,000 Ucat questions, or UKCAT questions. That's what Ucat used to be called. And I got it from a medical student at my school who didn't need it anymore, I think, from what I remember. But like I said, it was actually quite a long time ago, and it wasn't necessarily that popular to use online question banks, whereas there's much more now on offer. So don't be scared as well of using UKCAT, sorry. If something is called, a UKCAT book, the questions are still the same. So you might be able to get something cheaper if it's called that. But yeah, I used a book and I just did questions out of the book, but it's exactly the same idea as using a question bank. How can you practice mental maths? Also, where can you learn the different math topic that you might be unsure of? So in terms of like practicing mental maths, you can do QR questions from question banks and just say, I'm going to do them all in my head and just estimate them all and practice it that way. It's probably the easiest way, but don't do it under time pressure, just until you're more confident. And then in terms of math topic you might be unsure of, it's a good question, but any like GCSE resources should be fine and should explain it quite simply. There shouldn't be any complex maths topics that actually come up. So I'd say any sort of like maths resource online. Usually if you put into like YouTube or something, let's say probability, there'll be someone there who breaks down questions, and that can be quite useful. Advice about pie chart questions. Look what the question's asking first, and then look at the relevant part of the pie chart. I don't know whether you have a specific question about pie charts. If so, feel free to pop it in the chat. Something you'd recommend for us to try out or explore when deciding if medicine is for us, etc. If you can get work experience, that's great. Because even just having a feel for what life is like is good, but I know with COVID it is difficult for you guys. Talk to medical students. They love talking to prospective medical students, so and ask them, what do you like, what don't you like, all this kind of thing. Someone said watch YouTube videos on the life of medical students. You can do that if you want, although I personally, the ones I've seen haven't been super realistic, because they tend to be the kind of people who go out for brunch and that kind of thing. But talk to medical students about what they like and don't like, and read books as well. Lots of junior doctors write books. This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay is an amazing book. Just be careful if you watch the show which recently came out, because it's quite negative, I suppose. It's very accurate, but it puts a bit of a downer on everything. So I've seen it described as like a highlights reel of the negative aspects of medicine, so just be careful with that. But those kind of things, yeah, books, talk to medical students, and if you can get work experience, do that. Sometimes medical schools as well will let you come in for a day and have a look around. I'd say that. Do you think they'll make UCAT exams harder to combat the previous year's intake? No, I don't think so, but they might up the grade boundaries, I guess. Usually they compare. The thing is, UCAT is only ever looked at each year. So if someone's applying for, in a year's time, they have to take the UCAT. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say if there's a gap year student who's applying to be in medicine the year after they've left school, they still have to take the UCAT the year before they apply. So you're all basically put together and they rank you and they say, oh, these are the top 10%, these are the bottom 10%. And instead of looking at actual grades, they base it based on that, based on averages and things, instead of, whatever. So they might be stricter on, they'll say, oh, I'll take the top 40% instead of the top 50%, but I don't think they'll actually make the exams harder. Do I advise buying Medify or other resources? it's up to you if you have the money. There are loads of free ones. Someone's mentioned free ones, Ucat Ninja, Ucat's I just recommend Ucat's website. It's brilliant because it's exactly the same as what you actually will be doing. So definitely do those, and it's completely free and easy to access. But then in terms of others, it doesn't matter whether you pay for something or you get something for free, as long as you're just doing loads of questions and finding the one that's right for you. I have 3 weeks till Ucat. Really struggle with this section. Do you have a specific time I should do each day? Really struggle with this section. Do you have a specific time I should do each day? Do you mean sort of how much time you should spend on it each day? Because like I said, maybe coming up to your exam, you can do maybe more like half an hour to an hour a day, but just make sure you're also being kind to yourself, getting plenty of rest, drinking plenty of water and eating healthy, doing exercise and not being too stressed, because a lot of it is about staying calm under the pressure of the actual exam. But yeah, just continue to practice, and even within 3 weeks you can improve massively. And there are people who sit the Ucat without practicing at all, so just bear that in mind as well. Will you be able to ask for a handheld calculator because the computer ones are really fiddly? No, they don't let you have a handheld one. You have to use the computer one, which is why you need to get good on mental maths, because unless you're a brilliant typist, it's quite difficult to use the online calculator. Do questions that you practice before the exam ever repeat in the exam? I don't think so. In theory, the Ucat website ones should, because they should also be in the question bank, but I'm not sure whether they've removed them from the bank or not. But there might be very similar questions. What topics should we learn for QR for maths? Probability comes up loads. Finding the area of a shape comes up a lot. Interpreting train timetables comes up a lot. And then, yeah, percentages come up a lot. They're really the main things that come up. There's not much else that comes up. How can I improve speed for VR? I'm an international student and usually cannot answer half the questions, which I do. So VR first is really, it's seen as one of the harder sections, and everyone does quite bad on it. Definitely everyone has poorer scores on that compared to the other sections. Yeah, learn to skim read and read the question first so you know what you're looking for, and make sure you're familiar with the types of questions that can come up for verbal reasoning, because some people get thrown by the questions that are like true, false, or not mentioned in the passage. So you need to do lots of Ucat questions so that you can start picking up on what exactly they mean by that. I hope that makes sense. How do you tackle VR? So much information just overpowers me and just end up guessing. Read the question first, go back to the passage and skim read through. It's a skill, just like try and read a lot as well. It's a good skill to have, because when you become a senior medical student and junior doctor, you have to read a lot of information quickly. So it's just a general good skill to have, and just read a lot and you should be okay, really. But everyone does worse on verbal reasoning compared to their other sections. So if you're scoring slightly lower than your other sections, don't worry too much. Do you remember how many full mocks you completed before the exam? There was only 2 on the Ucat website back then, so I think I did 2. But I did a lot more questions before that. Do you have to get all the questions right to get 900? Yeah, that's full marks. That's sort of just how it works. And then I can't remember how they figure it out, how many marks is lost per question, but 900 is full marks. So you have to finish all the questions and get them correct. You can do practice on mental maths training websites which are timed. Yeah, there's probably, you know, apps and mental maths games that are designed for, you know, like year 7s, etc. You can even just try doing that, because it is simple mental maths that you need to be good at. So honestly, the level of maths isn't particularly hard. It is just that timing and actual technique. Is it better to book your Ucat exam in the morning, noon, or afternoon? doesn't matter, whichever one suits you the best. Some people are morning people, some people are afternoon people. I would usually say like late morning is the best, honestly, because I know for me, I get tired by the afternoon. So I like a middle of the day exam, but it depends. Some people would prefer to, go through some techniques in the morning and then sit in the afternoon. Other people would just want to get out of the way. Does the Ucat Ninja have more questions than the actual Ucat website? I would have guessed so, although I haven't been on the actual Ucat website super recently. Do I regret doing medicine, and what is my name? My name is Ella, yeah. Thank you for that, whoever wrote it in. No, I don't regret doing medicine. I wouldn't have done 4 years. I would have dropped out if I regretted it. They don't, lock us up or anything. So no, I don't regret doing medicine, although I do say to people it's a big commitment, and there are definitely, so I've just finished my 4th year, and many people say 4th year is the hardest year because the hours are very, very long. And I would say there are some times when I am like, think, am I regretting it? And there are definitely times I struggle, but I don't overall regret it. I really enjoy it. I think it's really rewarding and fun all the time. I just say to people, if you're not sure on medicine, or someone's, you're going to medicine because, for example, your parents are telling you to, then in that case, I would say probably don't go into it. But if you're passionate, if you've taken steps to make sure medicine's for you, then you'll be absolutely fine. Decision-making section advice. I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head. I found decision-making to be a slightly easier section. I don't know why, but I just always, my brain worked that way. Just make sure you read the questions properly. And I would sometimes on the whiteboard write out like the bullet points, I guess, like the actual conclusions you can get from the information that they are giving to you. And yeah, just read the question carefully with decision making. That's the best advice I can give. Can you explain what is meant by skim reading? Because sometimes I get confused. Yeah, it just means to not read every word in detail, but let's say you've read a question. If the question says something like, what do penguins eat? You then skim through the passage. You quickly read through the passage until you pick up words that are related to that, and then you can read that sentence in more detail. Is medicine actually 5 or 6 years? Different people say different numbers. Depends what university you go to. I believe Oxbridge is 6 years. Most places are 5 years. Manchester's 5 years. If you do a foundation year or decide to intercalate, which means to do a different degree, then that will make your degree 6 years as well. And if you have already done another 3-year degree, you can do medicine in 4 years if you want as well. But usually it's 5, some places it's 6. And some places have compulsory intercalation, which means you have to take another year out to do a degree. Nottingham used to do that. I don't know if they still do. So usually a 6-year course is going to be a bit more academic, or might have another degree sort of incorporated in, but most will be 5 years. And it doesn't, for both of them, you get a medical degree at the end of it where you're allowed to practice. So it doesn't actually matter that much unless you're interested in research and academics. My vocabulary is not good for VR. Do you know any website which can help me? Because it affects my speed and also my confidence. Any yeah, so someone's recommended Medify. Any sort of comprehension style practice website, but I don't know any other specific ones apart from Medify. What do you want to do with your degree? Do you want to specialize? And do you have to specialize? So how it works is, so I will have 1 more year left of training, and then I become a foundation doctor, where you take 2 to 3 years, depending on how long you want to take, rotating through different specialties and doing junior doctor jobs. So, pretty much admin-y kind of things, and triaging patients and clerking patients. And then after that, you can specialize. You don't have to specialize. You can become like what's called a locum. So you just work in different specialties wherever there's staff shortages. Or you can continue just being like a foundation doctor, although I don't think people usually want to. Because you don't get paid very much, I think, and most people usually want to specialize. My favorite placement's been pediatric A&E. I like emergency medicine, I like pediatrics, but I will probably go into general practice at some point in my life, because as a consultant in emergency medicine or pediatrics, you still have to do night shifts and do quite unsociable hours. So hopefully one day I'll have a family and I'll move to general practice, I think. But my mind changes with every placement I do. So just not surgery. I'm definitely not a surgeon. I faint in every surgery. So yeah. What was my fifth option? It was biomed at Manchester, which was a big mistake because they offered me a place with 3 A's for my offer, which wasn't less than medicine. So it wasn't great, and I had to interview for it. So just read the small print before you apply for your fifth option. Most people choose biomed at their top university though. How do you answer the question, why do you want to be a doctor? Be like legitimate. Think about why you actually want to be a doctor, and just like answer it straight from your heart, really. Try and avoid cliches like, I just want to help people, because especially in an interview, they'll say something like, well, why aren't you a nurse? We have like nurse shortages. So usually you have to then talk about how you're interested in science, how you want to be an expert, maybe how you want to be a leader of a team, how you want the responsibility of teaching your patients and changing their lives, things like that. Are usually good ways of answering that question. What's the teaching style like at Manchester? They invented PBL, so we're heavily PBL based. Even in your senior medical student years, you don't do PBL, but you do something very similar where you're given cases and you have to discuss what you would do in those cases. But with PBL, there's an aspect of asking questions about the case and then going home and actually doing the research. But when you're a more senior medical student, you're sort of expected to already have that knowledge. And so you talk about cases, but you don't go home and research it. You're just sort of quizzed on it, really. And then they also do full body human dissection. So there's not many universities that do that, but Manchester still are one of them. And there's lots of early clinical experience going into hospitals from first year, communication skills and things like that. So that's what the teaching style is like. I personally like it because I like a more hands-on feel, and that's very Manchester. But and also we're full-time placement from third year, whereas some other places are from fourth year. So that kind of thing's good if you like. Manchester's good for those kind of things. What did I mean by when I said triage? Triaging is just like prioritizing patients. Like what I meant was sort of junior doctors are sometimes the first people to see a patient and get all the initial details down and then present it and then decide, does this person need to see a consultant? Can I treat this person? That kind of thing. How would you describe work-life balance? It's what you make of it. You could do medicine 24/7. If you wanted to, you're never going to finish medicine because there's so much of it. But so it's what you make of it. You have to learn how to say no, which I think a lot of people find hard in the transition period from school to university, because in A-levels, while it probably felt like a lot of work to you, there was a finite amount of work you could do. There was an end point, whereas in medicine there's not. You're consistently learning for your whole career, and you even then probably still don't know everything. So it's just learning to say no, and then you can have a good work-life balance. Although when you get to fourth year, like I was sometimes at placement, I would leave my flat at like 5:30 in the morning, get back at 8 at night, and then still have like research to do, because that was just placement, that wasn't actual learning as well. So it's hard in your more senior years of medical school, but earlier on it's pretty easy if you learn how to manage it well. Why did I want to do medicine instead of nursing? I was more interested in the science than actually, I obviously wanted to help people, but I was more interested in actually the problem solving, the diagnosing of conditions, that kind of thing, really. I wanted to do more of the actual management instead of sort of looking after the person. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. Just if you do get asked why not a nurse, just be careful, because sometimes they get nurses to be the interviewers in those stations, so don't be rude about nurses. Nurses are incredibly useful, and bearing in mind the fact that some nurses now can prescribe, but it's still, they still have to be overseen by a doctor. They're just not allowed to, they're not allowed to have the like ultimate say in most cases. Yeah, so I think they've already done the verbal reasoning webinar, and yeah, you should be able to find it on the SixMed website. If you can't, email SixMed and they will send it to you. How do exams work for medicine generally? Usually you have two types of exams. You have a multiple choice question exam, which is harder than it sounds. They're massive, long exams that last like 3 hours. And then you also have practical exams, used to be called OSCEs, but now called CCAs. And they are usually like 16 different stations, and they'll test anything from prescribing to examining a patient to taking a history to managing an ethical scenario. So they're the two main types of exams, but you're also then assessed on a reflective portfolio, and depending on where you are, you might also have to do some research. At Manchester, we don't do essays or written work through the year, but we do one essay at the end of the year, which is usually about 10,000 words, so that's assessed as well. Was first body dissection scary? Not really. They kind of like on your first day show you the bodies, and then they send you home after like 5 minutes, and then you come back and they might show you how to dissect and then send you home, and then they might let you dissect after that. But if you're like not keen, I was never super keen on it, but they were never super strict on making me dissect when I didn't want to. And I was actually in a group with one of my best friends, and every time it was my turn to dissect, he'd be like, oh no, don't worry, I'll do it for you. So pretty manageable, and you get pretty desensitized to it. I remember like late on in my second year, I think, we had to remove a head of one of the cadavers, and there were some neuroscience students who'd never seen dissection before, and one of them fainted, I remember, when she saw, but we were all pretty, whatever. But so no, not really scary, and most people find it useful. Definitely less scary than if the first time I helped in a surgery, if that was the first time I'd ever, sutured, which means like sewing or used a scalpel, then that would have been much scarier than having done that on a dead cadaver. So I'd say it was okay. How did I revise for Chem and Bio A level? I found chemistry to be, I just basically did loads of mock exams. That's the easiest way I can say it. Biology is super applied. The questions, like the content's not hard, but the questions can be quite hard because you have to apply your knowledge. So definitely for biology, loads of question papers. And then with chemistry, I think it's a bit more like definite what the actual content is. So I would say you can go back and use mind maps, etc. for chemistry, but just make sure you've done loads of practice papers for both. Is volunteering necessary for medicine to write in personal statements? I would say yes, definitely, or at very least have had a paid job, because you need to show commitment and dedication over a longer period of time than just a week of work experience. But yeah, it's not compulsory. Like if you don't have it, then you don't have it, but make sure you then compensate for it with extracurricular activities and work experience and anything else. But it definitely looks good. I would say it's the easiest thing to talk about. And the main thing they look for in personal statements is reflection. So always break down any experiences you've had and take a specific example from, for example, your work experience. So if you've seen some team working, for example, then say, this specific thing happened. this is what I learned from it. These are the skills I developed during it. And then let's say it's a skill you're particularly weak at, you could say, and then I went on to do something else to build on this and then talk how it applies to medicine. So do it like that, really. That's sort of passive statements in a sentence, but I could talk about personal statements for hours, but yeah. How many hours a day do I spend studying? I assume you mean as a fourth year medical student. So it would depend on the type of placement. Some places like GP placements are quite short. So they would be like 9 to 5s or 9 to 6s. And you'd get lunch breaks. And then you'd probably go home and do another 2 or 3 hours of work after that. So they were pretty okay. But then, for example, obstetrics and gynecology, which is like delivering babies, that would be like had to be at the placement for like 7:30, pretty much leaving at 7 as well, and then not having a lunch break and then having to go home. And that was a bit more of a complex, usually your studying relates to the placement you're on, and that was a bit more complex learning, so that was a much longer day. So it really just depends on what you're learning at the time. But in first and second years, it's more than a normal degree, but it's not that much, honestly. It's probably like, I don't know, 9 to 5s in first and second year. Is medicine a lot harder than biomed? It's just different and a much longer course. We pretty much cover everything that's covered in biomed, but they focus more on research. We focus more on how to apply it clinically. So I would say it's not a lot harder. It's just different. And depends what your interest or specialty lies in. Do I have any hobbies? Anything you recommend to put on personal statement? In terms of hobbies, sports always look really good, especially if you're in a sports team. Even an instrument, if you've played it for a long time, shows dedication. Any volunteering, even if it's that your neighbour wasn't very well through COVID and you went and got their medication every week, anything like that, as long as you can say something that you've learned from it, you can include it. Can you apply to medicine if you've got a 6 in biology GCSE? So when I did my GCSEs, we didn't have these numbers yet. So I'm trying to figure out what 6 is. So 9 is like, I assume 6 is about a B. Different universities will have their minimum marks on their application website. If they don't, you can email the admissions team for that university and they should tell you whether or not they would accept someone with a 6. So I recommend doing that. 6 is a B. Thank you for that. What leadership role were you in during your time in sixth form, as you were going to be a leadership role as a doctor? I was head of house at school. I also ran a club, from what I remember. I don't remember what the club was, but I'm pretty sure I ran a club and I did volunteering. I also was a tutor for a little girl who had communication issues, which is a leadership role. Any teaching is leadership roles. But then also I have multiple leadership roles while at uni. I'm currently president of a society in the MedSoc, and I have been sort of head of the medical school for like widening participation in my students' union and things like that. So yeah, if your school has a MedSoc, absolutely you can include this, especially if you do any activities like dissections. I'm pretty sure I talked about that in my interview because we had a MedSoc. Thank you for all coming today and good luck with everything. Can you talk about DV in your personal statement, or is it always the characters, as you can put your activities on the Ucat activities section anyway? Yeah, just if you talk about it, just make sure you've learned something. It's, especially if it's just like bronze DV, so many people do it that just, it's not worth like name dropping it. But if you did, like, let's say you were on an expedition for your DV and then you got lost, for example, and then you use teamwork or leadership or something in that situation, then you can talk about that specific situation. But otherwise, I don't name drop it. But yeah, if you learn something from it, your personal statement is all about talking about learning from things. Okay, there's no more questions on the Q&A. If you have any more questions, please feel free to pop them in. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully it was useful. But if you don't have any more questions, you can leave, and I'll give you a couple more minutes in case you're typing. But if not, thank you. No worries. Thank you, Lulu. Good luck with everything. I do talk about being self-taught and an instrument on your personal statement. Yes, as long as you talk about what it has taught you. Any specific skills or traits that's useful for medicine that it's taught you, then you can put it in. So let's say it taught you dedication or patience or, those kind of things, then yes, you can put it in. And just be prepared to talk about it in your interviews as well, because they might ask you about it. They usually have a copy of your personal statement at your interview. Hopefully that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You can feel free to leave if you've got no more questions. Thank you, everyone. I'll give you one more minute in case anyone's typing. If not, feel free to leave. Okay, thank you, everyone. I will end the webinar now. I hope it was useful.